our next guest. Who in the room knows Danny Nee? Yeah, I feel like that needs to be louder. Who in the room knows Danny Nee? Woo! So Danny Nee is a dear, dear friend of Startup Tucson and myself. I'm so excited to call him a friend and a mentor. And he is the executive director of CIC. He's going to tell you a little bit more about CIC, and he's going to introduce our panel. And, drum roll, he's going to announce our new partnership. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Thanks, Liz. All right, thank you so much. Those who lied about knowing me, I really appreciate that. My name is Danny Nee, Executive Director of Community Investment Corporation, or CIC, because it's a mouthful otherwise. We are an economic development nonprofit here in Tucson, been around since 1996, and our purpose is to help people access the economy. The economy works really well for a lot of people, but a lot of people have been left behind. And so we do that through three main pillars. We do it through education, through home ownership, both asset building, and then, of course, entrepreneurship. And what we try to do is really innovative stuff in the capital space. So one thing that we run is we have a 0% loan, micro loan, up to $10,000 for entrepreneurs of color. And it is entirely managed by the community, by all BIPOC community members. They came up with the loan, they came up with the underwriting, eligibility, and they make all the decisions. And all CIC does is we fundraise for it and we administer it. So that's the type of stuff that we're doing, and that sort of sets the stage for both the partnership we're going to announce and the group that's going to come up in a second. I do want to give a shout out to my staff, hardworking staff. They're over here up front. So thank you guys. Also to our organizational BFFs, that's what I always call them, that's Startup Tucson, and then UACI is working in there. If it wasn't for Eric, then they would be. I really love Casey. Eric's okay. So really appreciate all that you've done for this week and bringing attention to one of these issues. This issue of capital is that, again, the status quo works for some, but not for all. There are a lot of statistics about venture capital. Some are pretty stunning. Venture capital and angel investment, 17 times the equity investment is invested in white founders than in Hispanic and Black founders combined. In 2021, just 2.7% of all venture capital went to women founders. So if you don't look like me, white dude, then capital is not equitable in terms of the access, and we want to change that. We're working on that. So one thing that we're doing is we're working with an amazing group. We already know the amazing group Startup Tucson, but another amazing group, which is Common Future. Common Future, let me just grab my notes so I don't miss it. They are a group that's based out of Oakland. They are doing work all around the country. So founded in 2001, Common Future works to close the racial wealth gap. They're building a future where people, no matter the race or color, have power, choice, and ownership over the economy by restoring power to communities across lines of difference to build a future in which we can all thrive. What I can tell you is that Eric Horvath, who I'm about to announce, if you can look up his bio, he's done amazing work. I met him when he worked for a place called Transform Finance. He's done the on-the-ground, front lines kind of work that you need to do in this space to bring about the shifting of capital decisions around capital. What you will probably hear the rest of this afternoon, if you come and see me speak later on as well, you'll hear about how diverse founding groups and diverse investors actually have a higher ROI to their investors and to their communities, and yet we have not really embraced that. Venture capital continues to flow towards the same groups. The partnership that we're doing now is a revenue-based finance product, and Common Future has invested $250,000 into Tucson to help us start that. Community Investment Corporation, for our part, we are matching that $250,000. So we're going to have $500,000. There is somebody else here, Dave, who is in the audience. He works for NED, Dave and Mayur, and they are going to be our tech platform. And he's going to be talking later if you're interested and to help us get that money out efficiently. But you'll hear more about that later. But I want to bring Eric up. He's a friend, and he is a true advocate for this work, and he has a great panel. They're going to be talking about all different types of alternative capital, not just angel investment, not just venture capital. Unfortunately, and I'm sorry to the people in the room that that's what you do, but that takes up too much space. It takes up too much conversation for actually how little of it actually goes to the businesses. There are lots of other ways to get capital into the hands of the diverse entrepreneurs that need it. So, Eric, it is really my pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for traveling from New York to be with us today, and the panelists. I really hope you enjoy that, and thank you all for being here.
I don't know when the
I don't know if somebody.
good luck. I'll be passing this back to you.
Okay.
I have to turn it on. Now it's on. Okay. All right. So yeah, my name's also Eric. So his name is also Eric. So I was really confused about things that I didn't understand about myself or some of the jokes. Oh, wow, things are here? All right, so I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I love working with Liz, Kanisha, Danny, both their organizations. I've told my friends about, speaking at TENWEST, most colorful design of a conference I've ever been to. I think I was wearing my yellow pants yesterday, and Liz was just like, "Oh, you're really matching like the motif and like the color palette of the conference." I'm like, just being me. So really feel at home. We have a really good conversation with folks that have come in from around the country. Two that identify more on the kind of capital provider, intermediary side, and then two that identify more on the entrepreneurial side, so more of the capital seekers. So I'll just give a quick kind of intro and background, and then I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some questions. So just as Danny said, the title of the session is Impact Capital for Founders and Funders. And I think if people walk away from the conversation with two things, I'd really want you to think and be inspired by how can we think creatively and how can we think differently and outside the box about how capital moves, either in terms of deployment or attraction of it. So thanks to Danny's introduction, he's highlighted a lot of reasons of how the status quo around capital moves is inefficient and inequitable. So everyone on the panel, and you'll hear from them, are thinking and engaging directly in alternative forms, which doesn't necessarily mean alternative products. It could be just a repurposing or a different take on existent products. But number one, I really hope that everyone walks away with some new ideas and some creativity around how you think about capital deployment and capital attraction. And then the second one is related to it, but beyond the creativity, I really hope that folks think about fit and compatibility as it relates to capital. I think Danny also mentioned this, is just that not all forms of financial resources for everybody. And that's not a good or a bad thing, but compatibility and alignment is something that you'll really hear about. And also, you're going to hear a lot from our panel, not just about financial capital, but the relational, political, all of the other types of support that comes in the form of capital as a resource. So creativity and alignment and fit. I hope folks can walk away with those and hear that throughout. So I'll just do my introduction. We didn't plan this, so Danny, I didn't know how much you were going to introduce me, so I figured I had to know my name and everything. So my name is Eric Horvath. I'm the Director of Capital Strategies at Common Future, and I'm based in New York. And my work as the Director of Capital Strategies is I work with communities of color around the country to create impact investments by, for, and with them. So based in New York, but we're in geographies around the country, and that's how I met a lot of the folks on the panel. So without further ado, I think we'll hand it over to Jordanna first to give a land acknowledgement, and then actually let's do that, and then I'll kind of explain or run down the intro list.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Jordanna. I own and operate Trauma Recovery Services of Arizona. I'm Navajo, so I just wanted to give a land acknowledgement to kind of start the day. You know, we are here on the traditional homelands of the Tohono O'odham, as well as the Pasco Yaqui and several other tribes that have historically moved in and out of this area. So I'm also a U of A graduate, so bear down.
Actually, Lucas, let's start with you. Just your name, where you're based, kind of the geography that you work or serve, and then just your role and a little bit about your organization.
Sure. Can folks hear me okay? Is this mic on? This is mic number 2. Great. So my name is Lucas Turner-Owens. I'm an investor at the venture capital fund TMV. I'm based and live in New York, although we invest nationally. We are investing out of our second fund, a $64 million fund that invests pre-seed to Series A in healthcare, logistics, financial inclusion, and the future of work. Really happy to be here on a great panel, and yeah, appreciate the hosts of TENWEST bringing us out.
And what geography do you exist in, or?
So I live and work out of New York, but we invest across the country.
I'm Whitney, the founder and CEO of Eemerg Roadside Assistance Marketplace. As an entrepreneur on this panel, I service the full United States, offering roadside assistance solutions to customers who have limited options.
And where
I'm from St. Louis.
People like St. Louis. All right. None for New York, though. That's okay. All right, yeah. One person.
Hey everyone, I'm Sandhya. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in Seattle, and my role is Managing Director of Community Credit Lab and Common Future Investments. I just adopted this role prior to joining forces with Eric at Common Future. I was the Executive Director of Community Credit Lab, where we worked and partnered actually with Common Future on a character-based lending program. Basically, what we did at Community Credit Lab and what we'll continue to do with Common Future is raise the investments that are needed to really support community-led and community-informed investing. And I will pass it to Jordanna to share a little bit more.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned, I own and operate Trauma Recovery Services of Arizona. We service the state of Arizona. It's a telehealth-based private practice, and we specialize in a kind of psychotherapy called EMDR therapy. We serve ages 13 and up, and what really makes our business different, I think you'll learn a little bit more about, is really our focus on diversity and inclusion. We focus on treating BIPOC folks, LGBTQIA folks, and people who just kind of struggle with getting into services.
All right, great. So, for us to kind of get to, what I believe is, you have to be on the same page before you can start looking creatively and outside the box. So the first part of the discussion, I'm going to ask, just as a side note, the two women to the left of me engage more in terms of affordable credit and debt. So if that's kind of where you're thinking, you'll hear a lot of creativity on debt from these two folks. And then Lucas and Whitney will talk a little bit more about, bootstrapping, but then also just engagements around equity investment. So I think the first part that I want to touch before we can get to the how do we do it differently or how do we think creatively is just, and either this can be to Sandhya or Jordanna, from where you sit, just what is your understanding or experience with traditional debt? So just a bit of a level set for the room, and then we'll get more into the creative, like how are we engaging with it differently in the second part.
So as a intermediary, so someone who provides capital to businesses, entrepreneurs, funds, and takes in capital from investors to be able to do that, I would say that the conventional approach, and really why I got into this work that I do today, is because when we're thinking about debt and how you engage with individuals, the process never really starts from a place of trust. It starts from a place of where the person who's seeking capital has to prove themselves to the banker, to the lender, whoever it is. And it's just not helpful. It's not helpful to the confidence of the individual. It's not helpful to the business owner. And it really kind of creates a lot of animosity, and it doesn't really create a working relationship going forward. Even if debt is extended and the terms are accepted, after that you kind of feel on edge. You're not really excited to talk to this person because you didn't start from this place of like mutual respect and mutual trust. You started from a place of questioning. And so really, I think when I think about how we can change that, it's where are we starting from? What's that baseline that we're starting from, and moving away from that?
Just loved Jordanna, especially on the entrepreneur side and trying to attract capital. You shared, in the green room, just some of your experiences, unfortunate experiences around it. So if you could speak to any of that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So as an entrepreneur, I originally started my business, I bootstrapped it. And then, as most people know, at some point you realize that you need to grow, right? And that takes capital. So my first experience getting capital, frankly, was pretty exploitive. It was like, we're gonna give you this amount of money and then that's it. And it doesn't come with anything. What was fundamentally different about my experience working with these folks through Native Women Lead was that there's relation building, which means that the capital came with other supports and resources. I think, do you want me to talk about that now?
Just any of the challenges that you've had before engaging with the Native Women.
Oh yeah, it was exploitive, extractive, and it wasn't sufficient.
What do you mean by extractive? Like what did that look like? Well,
for me, there was no communication about what I do, about the purpose, about what makes my business different. There was no interest in getting to know, what my goals and values are. It was like, okay, what's your credit score? What's your business credit score? Here's how much money we can give you. Here are the rates, and that was kind of it.
So, do you want to just tack onto it?
Yeah, I'll speak to that sort of from the perspective of working in venture capital. So this was alluded to earlier, but there's a big problem in venture capital with regards to getting money to women and people of color. So just to sort of give folks all of the stats, as was already mentioned, 2.4% of venture capital in 2021 reached women solely founded companies. 1.4% reached Black founders, and obviously that has a compounding effect on Black female founders. That's 0.02% of venture capital in 2021 reached Black female founders. I think that the root of that problem is a lack of diverse investors in VC. I'm one of 3% of Black investors in venture capital. That itself is a problem. 12% of women in venture capital hold decision-making seats and are active investors. At TMV, because we are a firm that's led by 2 women GPs, and we're a very diverse team across our venture partners, our go-to-market team, I think you see what happens. We have a portfolio that's 77% racial and ethnically diverse. We have a portfolio that's 53% female founders. And I think there's 2 other things that happen. One is that we have, I think, unique, non-overlapping networks with traditional venture. And 2, we have an understanding of problems that are being addressed that impact women and people of color ahead of some more traditional venture firms. So companies that we've backed like Kindbody, which is now a benefit with Walmart in 33 different states offering IVF and fertility services, that's a company that we backed really early because we saw the need for that kind of a company, and that company had a lot of trouble raising capital in the early stages. So that's what I mean when I say that it's about network, it's about realizing that problems are problems that even though they might not resonate with traditional venture capitalists.
Thank Lucas. Thanks, Whitney. Do you want to talk at all about your experience with fundraising or dealing with investors, or just any of that, and the kind of approaches that you took?
Well, I've had the meetings. As an African American woman, when you enter a room in a situation where you feel like you're not being acknowledged, I left it behind. So we're fully bootstrapped. I took the journey, rode up the road, didn't really like what I was getting, and didn't really like the fact that nobody looked like me in the room, didn't really like the fact that people who hadn't really met the goals or really met the qualifications that I had overachieved were being acknowledged and we're getting the funding. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? What am I missing? You know, and like, we've always been told as an African American woman or as a person of color that you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. And I just wasn't going to stand for that. Like, I can do it myself. I don't really need it. Like, you know, I don't need the funding, I want it. And so I had to make a decision on whether or not I wanted to grow fast, burn and churn, or if I wanted to build a company that would stand for something and that was valuable to me and that could also make an impact for the people that I was choosing to work with.
Whitney, going into those conversations a little bit, because you've shared how challenging they've been, are there, and kind of going off of what Lucas was saying too about maybe some issues in the industry, are there things how those engagements could have gone, or like, how would we have solved for that? Because Danny and I may disagree. We didn't prep on this, but we may disagree. I think there is a space for venture funding. I think a lot of people, a lot of startups and a lot of a lot of the crowd probably does see merit and value in it. I think what we're trying to get at though is like the application of it, the approach, and just how it's administered and how the industry works. Not that there isn't a good use case for it in all cases. So how could it have gone more productively, or maybe it couldn't have?
You know, I think so. But one of my biggest pet peeves was the fact that just like investors see numerous companies, us as entrepreneurs are going to numerous meetings. And like, we're doing our research on the investment group, we're doing our research on the brands and what their expectation is, making sure that, you know, we won't run into any issues before we get into this room. You know, preparing our cap tables and preparing our slides and everything the way that we think that this investor will want to see it, and actually taking the time to get to know what they like and what they look for, because, you know, to be honest, we're looking for this money, you know, but it's not reciprocated. You go into these rooms and you sit there for 30 minutes, you talk to these investors, and the very first question is, what do you do? How did I get to this point in this meeting and you don't even know what my company does? You know, it has to be something that sets me aside from the competition for me to have gotten this far and be sitting in your face. So the least you can do is go to my website and read my bio. Like, the very bare minimum is just know, like, who you're talking to, you know. So that was one of my biggest issues.
Thank you for sharing that. So Lucas, I know, because Lucas and I go way back. There's no way that you show up to a meeting like that. I just know, I know who you are. I mean, like when we go to play tennis, I feel like you prepare for us to play tennis and stuff. So you're just always ready, and you would never do that. But I've heard those stories as well. Sadly, like Whitney's story, and just like the disrespect that investors and kind of the power that is perceived or afforded to the capital holders, and it doesn't feel right. So I know that's not how you operate. So as we move more in towards we've established kind of some of the challenges and like how do we do it a bit differently. How do you operate as a venture capitalist, as someone that's doing these investments, hearing how your colleagues in the industry sometimes show up to meetings with entrepreneurs? Just how do you operate, and how do you do this in a way that I know is really true to your values?
Yeah, so we're a firm of operators. So every investor on the team has started a business, in many cases started and sold several businesses. So I myself started a consulting business that wouldn't have been an appropriate fit for venture capital, right? Like, what we were doing wasn't intended to scale massively. We were working with CDFIs, we were advising them on policies to get more debt to entrepreneurs of color, but it wasn't a fit for VC. But I say that to say that all of our team members have a certain level of empathy for the journey that entrepreneurs are going through. So we don't show up to meetings unprepared. We do sincerely try to help everyone that we meet, even the folks that we don't invest in. We make connections, help them with business development, invite them to conversations that we hold around the country to try to connect them to other funds that might be better fit for them. So that's part of it. I think the other thing that we do is we think about impact really seriously when we invest across these different industries that we're in. rather than kind of speaking to it in platitudes, I want to tell you about some of the companies that we're invested in because I think it tells the story a little better. So there's a company that we invested in. So one of the areas that I cover is financial inclusion. The company we invested in is called Bridge. And what they do is they're bridging the world of customer sentiment surveys, getting paid to say, do you like Nike or Adidas products, and neobanking. Because the core problem for a lot of working class people is not having enough money. It's not that you need to get your paycheck 2 days earlier, it's that you need to be making more money. So this app is actually paying folks often up to $200 a month to just answer questions on their lunch break and do customer sentiment surveys. That money goes into their bank account, and this is a company that's launching primarily in the Southeast, in Atlanta, in Birmingham. That's an example of an investment that we made, which has a lot of impact and is focused on going to markets where some fintech companies are not going. So that's one example. Another example, if you're thinking about climate change and sort of to get a better picture of who we are as a firm, we invested in a company called Leaf Logistics. What they do is they help optimize trucking routes because 30% of trucks on the road run empty. And if you can optimize for that, if you can make sure that there's no less than full truckloads happening and you shorten routes, it means less metric tons of CO2 being put out in the atmosphere. That's another example. On the healthcare side, we just saw a really cool company that's addressing kidney failure, which is an issue that specifically impacts black communities. So in so many neighborhoods, you'll see, check cashing stores, pawnbrokers, and DaVita dialysis clinics. And I'm not trying to single out DaVita, but there's often a lot of dialysis clinics in low-income neighborhoods. That experience is awful. You're going 3 times a week to have a tube put in you for 4 hours a day. Folks can't keep a job. We're looking at companies that are addressing that and intervening at stage 3 instead of stage 5, when you have probably 5 years left to live in some cases. At stage 3, you can actually reverse the effects of kidney failure. So we're looking at some of these kind of companies that can make interventions that specifically support working class communities. And I think that makes us a little bit different than folks that are just saying, how big is the market? How much money can we make? What are the unit economics? We're trying to address issues that we think are, doing both, frankly, because in venture, I don't want to, what's the word? I don't want to puff us up too much. In venture, the focus is certainly to make a really big return, right? It is not impact first, it is profit first, but we believe there are certain market-based solutions and certain opportunities where you can do both. Yeah.
So before we bring it over back to Sandhya and Jordanna, Lucas, I just want to ask, you talked about your team being diverse, and you talked about how you treat prospective entrepreneurs or investees. How do you think your team is able to do that? Did you read a textbook and that has taught you how to show up in spaces where there's a power dynamic, or how did you learn that? I think people are really always very curious to understand, how do you show up and be in right relationship with folks? How do you treat people well? How are you able to kind of be on the same side of the table, even though there is an established or a perceived power dynamic, which there certainly is when there's a capital provider and a seeker. But how are you able to do that?
I think I can speak just for myself personally and say that I get a lot of energy from talking to folks who are on fire about their idea. So that allows me to have a little more patience, a little more kindness, and I feel like I'm benefiting, learning a lot by talking to an expert in their field. So I try to enter conversations in that way. What I think is often true in venture, because I've seen this from other investors, is just like a level of arrogance about all fields, right? There's no way you can be all-knowing across all industries. So we try to show up with that level of humility, and we learn a lot in the process.
And also just I think the lived experience piece as well, of just I think we all can just appreciate just being underestimated and having to, to Whitney's point, working twice as hard to get half as much, and we can just see it. It's not something that, and people are nodding to, it's not, people sometimes ask me or some of my colleagues around how do you figure this out? How do you find these, diverse founders? How do you work with these partners? And it's maybe unsatisfying, but I don't know if we would say it's in a textbook, or you can watch a webinar and this is how you build out your network. This is how you operate differently. It's really about a lot of humility, like Lucas is saying, and just trusting in the experience that we have too. So I want to, we talked about the equity side. I want to bring it back to some of the debt side. So for Sandhya, I want to hear a little bit. You founded Community Credit Lab. If you can talk a little bit about that, and then maybe a specific example of how the issues that you highlighted around traditional debt being a bit problematic, what's a program or a pilot, it doesn't have to be the one that we've worked on, that you kind of tried to push the envelope and solve for some of those deficiencies?
Yeah. I'll say that normally when investors come to the table, or lenders come to the table, they already know what size or amount of debt they want to put in. They know kind of their range of interest rates. They know the terms. The products are already pre-designed. And that is fundamentally sometimes, and I think Danny alluded to this, sometimes it works for people and sometimes it really doesn't. And we are seeing that for a lot of the community partners that we work with, who are often excluded and extracted from the financial system, it doesn't work. It doesn't work to be charged 12% interest on a loan and have to pay twice a month. It doesn't work for them. So really why Community Credit Lab started was to flip that and to say, okay, let's not design products. Let's first talk to people and organizations and have them tell us what they actually need. Have them tell us, okay, I need a product for this to help businesses who are growing. I need a product to help women and gender diverse adults be able to attend a software boot camp. I need this, I need that. And rather than have the lender dictate what it is they need, have the community dictate what it is that they need. So we start there and say, okay, let's design first what it is that would be helpful to you. From everywhere from the use of funds to who gets to be able to access that capital, the terms of that capital, the interest rate, all of that is designed by our community partners first. And then we go out to investors and say, hey, this is what, you said you want to have deep impact. You said you want to come into communities and really be able to serve and see that impact. And this is what they need. And there's a lot of tension in that. And I'm not going to say that it's been easy to raise the capital that is actually needed by the businesses and the individuals that we really want to seek to support. But there has to be that mindset shift. There has to be that flip. We can't just start optimizing always for sustainability and profitability. We have to start somewhere where we kind of break that for a minute, see and prove that it can be done, and then build out that sustainability model. So an example of that, I'm going to use, I know you told me not to use one that we worked on, but I'm going to use Native Women Lead only because Jordanna is here, and she was actually a recipient of a loan that we designed with Native Women Lead. So how that process worked was Eric actually brought Native Women Lead to Community Credit Lab and said, hey, let's work on something together. I know that you all are trying to work on something called character-based lending, Native Women Lead, and I know that Community Credit Lab helps to design and implement loan programs. So we worked with them and they said, okay, this is, Native Women Lead said, this is how we want to design our program. We don't want it to be just, here's your capital and we'll walk away. It has to be, we have to be in right relationship with every single business that we work with. And we have to understand what it is that each individual business needs and then connect them to those resources, whether it's financial or non-financial resources. So we designed a program. They said, okay, a lot of our businesses are starting to see a gap between capital between $10,000 and $50,000. So we want to pilot something. And we're not going to look at each business's financials because they're all in our network. We see them everywhere we go. We see them showing up for each of these other businesses in our local communities. We're going to trust that because they're showing up and they're sharing their skills and they asked for this money, that we're going to give them this money. And we're going to trust them, and we're not going to put them through the ringer. And it really takes a different type of organization, and Eric and I were talking about this earlier. It's really hard to build that relationship. It's not something that you can kind of create a template and go out there, but they have been working so deeply in their communities Native Women Lead has been working so deeply in their communities for so long, they've been able to see who's there. They know who's there. They know who's showing up. So they really, when they talk about character-based lending, that's really what they're talking about is relationship-based lending, and they're really extending relationship dramatically. They're just thinking really radically different about how to extend credit based on trust. And so we worked with them to implement the program itself. And I guess I'll just pass it to Jordanna to share a little bit about what that experience was like from the receiving end.
And Jordanna, just before we hop in, just because we mentioned Native Women Lead, so they are based in the Southwest, because Jordanna's in Arizona, and our colleagues Vanessa and Jamie are based in New Mexico. Recommend looking them up if any of this is, have been compelling. I specifically recommend looking up their co-op capital program. I think that their personal loans, and I think it's been like 500,000 or $1 million. Anyway, it's been a good amount of money, and similar kind of like relationship-based underwriting techniques, and I think their default rate is like 1 or 2% or something. So they've stripped away all of the kind of draconian or more restrictive underwriting criteria and used how Sandhya described, like relationship-based, network-based, trust-based, and 98% repayment rate, something very, very high, in the high 90s. And being able to do it differently. And they continue to prove that their model is working, and it doesn't have to be the way that it typically has been. So I want to hear, maybe Sandhya alluded to it, but just, you said it wasn't so great, exploitive and extractive when you tried to seek capital in other places. Can you just walk through the experience of getting capital from Native Women Lead, the types of capital? We talked about that at lunch too, but what was that process like, and why do you think that was better than, the other alternative?
Sure. So I am one of the recipients of, it's called the Matriarch Restoration Fund, which I love the name, right? In that name, it tells you so much about that fund. Some of the key differences are, like we talked about, it being relation-based. So from the get-go, when we identified that I was going to be a recipient of the funding, the first thing we did was launch a series of conversations. What is it that your business needs? Here are some common things. Having dialogue, and immediately then connecting us to subject matter experts in those areas. So, I'm a practitioner by trade, right? I went to graduate school to become a psychotherapist. I became an entrepreneur out of necessity. And so for me, there were gaps in my knowledge area that they were able to say, you know what, we can help you with that. Your accountant is supposed to be doing these 7 things. Are they doing these things? No, they're doing 2. Okay, let's have a conversation. Connecting me to resources that were accessible, responsive, and affordable. Those were huge things for my business, because when you're an entrepreneur, you're out there sort of on your own, trying to vet people, and the way that you learn what's good and what's not is by losing a lot of skin. And so by working with these entities, they're able to pre-screen, and they have these vetted knowledge folks who can then step in very quickly, very rapidly, get to know your business, understand what your values are, and help you to move forward. And so I was able to get accounting services that were superior by far than what I had before. I was able to work with an indigenous business projection person to help me, to do things that I really fundamentally needed in my business to make sure that my business was sustainable and that my business will continue to grow in a way that aligns with my own values. And that relation building is really essential too, because it's not just about things for the business, but it's also about things for understanding how do we fit in community and what does that larger community look like. So connecting back to other indigenous entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs in the area, because I am here in Arizona, they're in New Mexico, but I have been able to go back and sort of get those supports from Native Women Lead, New Mexico Community Capital, and be exposed to more opportunities. Even coming here is a great example of that, right? Learning all these words. I sort of joked at lunch that one of the things I also learned by working through this program is that I'm a social entrepreneur, right? I was like, what is that? And I looked it up and I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. You know, but when you're running a business and you're in the middle of it, and like I said, you're trying to get these resources, it is a challenge because you're also operating a business. And I think that's one of the fundamental differences about BIPOC communities is a lot of times we're running the business. We're not collecting other people's money and burning it down. We're using our own money. And I think you have to understand that. And we also are supporting local economies. So Native women only make about 60 cents to the dollar. So I was at a conference last week and the t-shirt that the women were wearing said, "Pay me like a white man." And I was like, yes, please. So I feel like this is that step forward for us because then we're able to really participate in these larger economies where really we've struggled to just even connect to.
So I actually want to bring Whitney in here, something you had said at lunch about, that Jordanna kind of just referenced about bringing in other money and then, throwing it. Can you speak a little bit about you made the comments at lunch about.
No, it's okay. So I'm a tech company to start. So we build software that helps tow truck providers to get resources and jobs that they wouldn't typically see because of larger companies like AAA and the works. And one of my biggest issues with investment especially was going into these meetings, they would tell me like, I'm gonna give you $1 million, I'm gonna give you $2 million, but you have to churn and burn. Like you have to work fast. If it doesn't work, cut it off, start something new, spend this money as quickly as possible. And I'm like, okay, but what happens when it's gone? Oh, we'll just give you some more, we'll find some more somewhere, we'll give you some more if it's worth it, if it makes sense. Okay, but what if it doesn't make sense to you, but my idea still works for me? Okay, well then the business is done. When you spend this money, if you're not producing the way we want you to produce, if you don't have the numbers that we're looking for, dissolve the business, we'll count it as a loss. But I've poured my life into this. This is my baby. You can't tell me my baby's ugly, okay? And it's just like, but this is the way it works. This is the way venture capital works. This is the way tech businesses work. If you're not Uber, you're a failure. And so, yeah, I opted out, okay? And I know it sounds crazy, but we're still growing, we're still profitable, we still make a difference, we're nationwide, and we're hitting all the marks that I expected for us to hit without all of the nuances of having someone hovering over you, making sure that you are churning and burning as quickly as possible.
Before I bring us into the home stretch, I just want to highlight something that Sandhya said earlier, and I think Jordanna was kind of touching on a little bit, is we brought up the term like relation, being in right relationship and community with folks a lot. But I think what's really important and really key is that it doesn't stop after the money is deployed or the investment is made. We've talked about it on the front end of do you know these people? Is this part of your underwriting criteria? That's part of the front end to get to the investment or the lending. And then what Jordanna was highlighting was the follow through and the kind of being on the same side of the table and being invested equally in success as well after it. So the pre and the post piece. So I just wanted to highlight that as I think being quite incorrect apparently.
No, very correct. But I also just maybe to I think the difference is not you were able to access those resources, but it was Native Women Lead said, okay, you're getting the money, and here's the thing. It wasn't okay, go through all these resources and jump through a couple of hoops, and then maybe we'll decide about if we're gonna give you the money or not. It's about putting the money first, saying it's here, we're giving it to you, and we're providing all these other resources.
The sequencing is definitely.
The sequencing is definitely very key, especially when it comes to building trust, because a lot of times what I see with others, they're saying, oh, okay, you need to fix your books first and do this other thing first, and maybe go clean up all this other debt that you have on your books off first. And so that just creates more barriers and then more uncertainty about if that money is actually going to come through.
So we're going to talk, we're going to close out or move towards closing out around tensions. And Lucas, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to just kind of tee up the question. Creativity is fundamentally different than, like, the definition of being creative is doing something different than what currently exists. So creativity and disruption, it almost, if it's not being met with resistance or a challenge, then I don't know exactly if it's creative or disruptive at all. So the things that we've tried to highlight in the discussion is how things have been done and challenges we've had with it, and then creative ways to try to make it better. So with that, we've all had, kind of challenges or issues, or when you're trying to do something different. And I'm really curious from the group, and Lucas, we can start with you because we talk about this, just like existing in the space that you exist in for all of you, trying to do things differently, and then, like, what are some kind of walls that you hit because, oh, we can't do it that way, or like it's always been done this way, or that doesn't make any sense. What are those, and how have you navigated those?
Yeah, so I'll try to talk about three things. One is sort of the tension that can come from the priorities of your investors, right? Our fund has investors, LPs. I'll try to talk about the tension that I think I saw small business owners face when I was a lender in terms of pricing. And I'll try to talk about the tension of raising your next round, to Whitney's point. So in terms of getting capital, right, and this also touches on what you were saying, our LPs want to see returns in a really short time period. So they want to see, companies that are going to show them results in 3 years, 5 years tops, so that they can harvest those returns and see distributions from our fund. But that's not always in the best interest of the entrepreneur. It's just in the best interest of the LP, right? So it's important to find, I think, for venture investors, it's important to find LPs that are aligned and that care about impact. Those can look like we have an investor, which is the Visa Foundation. They want us to track diversity. We already were, and they're a really aligned investor. They're not as focused on, incredibly quick returns and at the sacrifice of us actually, following through on our mission and getting capital to folks who really need it. We also work with aligned endowments, aligned registered investment advisors who care about impact, high net worth families. Interestingly, $18.2 trillion of wealth is going to change hands by 2030. Most of that's going to go to young 20 to 30-year-olds who are inheriting wealth from their family's large businesses. These are all over the world. So if you can find a young person who cares a lot about impact, who just happens to be inheriting $1 billion, that can be a really good investor. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that is the secret sauce, right? If you can actually get like a whole host of LPs that care about impact as much as you do. It doesn't work for founders, but it works for us. The second thing I want to say is that on pricing, I think this is really important to call out. Picking up on your point that 60 cents to the dollar, right? What is true, it sort of hits, I think, entrepreneurs in two ways. One is that oftentimes folks will price their products and services at a price that can be affordable to their community, and they do that with love and with intention. And visitors from outside that community, when they enter, will sometimes think, well, why would I pay as much here in this community that doesn't look as spiffy as downtown as I would downtown? That's the problem that needs to be solved. So it can't be that entrepreneurs are hurt twice, once by trying to keep things affordable, and twice by folks who can afford to pay more but don't think that they should because of where they're shopping. So that's the pricing problem that needs to be unpacked. So I would encourage folks to spend as much as they would anywhere as they go into communities of color. And the third point is on the sort of the tension around providing support. But I don't want to sort of make this too long-winded, so I want to pass the mic, but I think there's something to be said about when we invest in a founder at the seed stage, who then needs to go on and raise a Series A, we run the risk of them not, we saw their mission, we saw their value, but will these much larger funds that don't traditionally invest in entrepreneurs of color see their values? So we invest a lot in supporting them in making those handoffs. We have folks in-house that do graphic design, folks in-house that do PR, folks in-house that do comms, to make sure that when you go out for that Series A, you're going to be successful. So that's another kind of tension that exists, is that we don't exist within an island. We're early stage investors. We need to pass the baton, and that's part of the work that we do.
Anybody? Just thank you, Lucas. Anything around like changes, or you trying to do things differently, and just resistance you've met with, or just how is that? You're trying to push the boulder up the hill, and what is that like for you?
I would say that just because like you don't take on venture capital doesn't mean that you don't get funding. There are all kinds of grants. We worked with a company called We Power, which is how we met Eric. Revenue-based funding, where you would essentially pay them their money back with the 2x or 3x markup, and you would still own the equity of your company. Just finding avenues that fit you. If it doesn't really fit what your vision is and your culture is for your company, don't feel pressured to do it. There are numerous different ways that you can receive funding for your company, or just pay for it yourself. I know it's not the ideal response, but there are multiple ways for you to build your company without necessarily taking on the heartache and headache of a VC.
Yeah, I will piggyback a little bit off of what Lucas's first point. When we were at Community Credit Lab, when we're looking to help our community partners design programs, oftentimes the programs are really, these are loans that are 5 to 7 years, 0 to 3% interest, a 6-month deferral period, monthly payments that can be really flexible. That's the type of debt that they're looking to put out in their communities. So when we're going to investors, we can't have the cost of capital from investors be higher than that. We can't, and that was a huge struggle. Investors were looking for 2, 3, 4, 5%. And when we're trying to take an investment to put out into these different communities, it can't be like that. Something has to give. So there were a lot of tough conversations that we had to have. We lost investors along the way. The terms that we were raising capital at were 0% interest promissory notes that were 10 years, where you get all of your money back at the end of the 10 years. Recoverable grants, where you get 50% of the capital that you invested back after 5 years, or just a grant where you get none of your money back. But this is the type of capital that needs to be activated in order to pilot new solutions. And I'm not saying that there isn't place for higher returns in other places, but if we're trying to pilot new things and allow our communities to have the same opportunities to make mistakes and fail, or even iterate and learn, or need the time and patience to make mistakes and fix those mistakes and then get back on track. But we have to have those right-sized tools and right-sized capital coming in from our investors, and that means a sacrifice of financial sacrifice at some point. And when it comes to investing in Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities that have been excluded and extracted from, who are constantly, their options that exist in their ecosystem are so high priced, and we've been doing this for centuries. When are we going to start repaying that debt that we owe and thinking really differently about how capital is moving in service of these communities to allow them to pilot, to allow them the place to then grow from?
So just off of Sandhya's point, if I were to answer this question, it's very similar to Sandhya's challenges and frustrations. When capital allocators or investors, sometimes when they talk to me, there's the hope or request for unprecedented, transformative solutions that have also been proven and have historical track record. So it's like kind of the joke that me and my friends in the industry have, that those things cannot exist at the same time. So if we are trying to do something creative or fundamentally transformative, you cannot ask for 10 years, 40 years of data basically to back it up, because then it would not be something different. I think what's really challenged in a lot of the impact investing space, or just trying to do something that's different, is because it is new, a lot of the approach is what are the comparisons, and it's comparing to things that have different DNA than what we're trying to do, and different historical track records. So the feeling of transformative but also proven, it doesn't really add up.
I don't know how to follow that. Yeah, I think I'll just kind of piggyback a little bit about what you were saying and maybe just share some of my experience with the difference. So as I mentioned, I bootstrapped my business. That's how it started. And then I did get some capital. It was phenomenally different because the program, I mean, I'm still not even in repayment. It's so new. But I can tell you that I am not worried at all about repayment. Because what it did is it created a foundation for my business to sustain itself. As a healthcare operator, and we take insurance, we take commercial insurance, we're always on that back end of our accounts receivable. It's 90 days. And then if a claim gets denied, then it's up to a year, right? Thankfully, that doesn't happen as much. But that working capital was so fundamental in being able to solidify what we do. I mean, Andrea's here. Andrea is our full-time assistant. Hi. We had a part-time assistant. Every 2 weeks, when it was time for payroll, I would sit there and pray to the bank gods and to all the insurances and be like, please, are we going to make payroll? Are we going to make payroll? Right? And as an entrepreneur, you have to pay all your people, right? You can't stay in business if people don't get paid, and you can't provide a service if you don't have the money to do it. And when you're growing rapidly, which we did, it's a challenge. And so, if you're getting a loan and they want you to pay 17% and they want it immediately, it doesn't really help you. It doesn't create that platform for you to really launch off of, to do the things that you need to do to sustain, build, and innovate. Because what we're doing is different because our value is different. 20% of our services are in kind. People come to us all the time and they can't afford their co-payments, they can't afford their deductibles, and we work with them. We have conversations with them and an understanding of that this is a relationship that we're building. You're part of our community. We want to help you. We don't want to set you up to fail. We want to set you up to succeed. You can't get that from a big box mental health facility. They're in it for money. We are in it to heal communities because that's our calling. And so getting the funding from Native Women Lead and participating in the Matriarch Restoration Fund was really phenomenal because it allowed me as a business owner and my staff and my clinicians to really sit in our space and understand that what we're doing is transformative because we're healing people. And you can't always do that in a way that's allocated. I mean, the insurance company says, this is how many you get. We're like, that's great, but we still need 2 more. So what do we do to get that need met? So anyways, I went off on my little healthcare tangent. Thank you.
So I got my final question. We're getting close to the top of the hour, and I don't know if I mentioned, maybe this is my surprise question, I don't know, but if you've been on other panels with me, it won't be a surprise anymore. So I'm really passionate about giving people agency and giving people the platform to speak their mind and speak their truth. And what I really enjoy closing panels with is often asking, what's something that you wish people asked you and why? So I came up with the questions, I ran them by you and everything, but I have moderated the session, and I just really want to hear and give you the platform. Any of you, any order, what is something you wish people asked you, and why? That they don't ask you.
I can start. When we do find those gem investors who want to come in at the terms that I was talking about, what I don't see those investors doing is saying, who else can I bring to the table? Who else can I bring here and convince so that it's not always on us to convince others to come to the table? How can you all, as investors, bring each other to the table as well?
I think for me, it's, we talk about impact. Impact, that term gets kind of thrown around a lot without a lot of specificity, and I say that from the perspective of sort of working in consulting and lending and community organizing and now in venture capital. And I wish folks ask the question, for the issue that we're focused on, what is the sort of single metric that moves the needle most? I think about the framework of planetary boundaries, right? Like there are all these different impacts of climate change, but there are some where we're much closer to the threshold or have already crossed the threshold. I wish that conversation was happening in impact, where someone could say, like, on the issue of financial inclusion, what is the single metric that you think matters the most? On the issue of fixing logistics, what is the single issue that matters most? To kind of focus the conversation and take out a lot of the noise around how everything has impact if you can spin it enough.
I'm going to piggyback off Sandhya and just say, as an entrepreneur, when you're speaking with funds, when you're making that type of commitment, just asking what else can we help you with, or who else can we introduce you to that may push the needle forward in your individual business and your growth.
Oh, I would say for me, asking entrepreneurs of color how you can support us in a way that isn't exploitive. So oftentimes as a business owner, we'll get asked to create documents for, oh, it's Native American Heritage Month, or it's this or that, but then there's no follow-up. There's no support, there's no sustainability. It's like they just want a cute icon to sort of put out there, and that's really inauthentic and harmful to us, because really, like, we want a partnership. We don't want to be eye candy for you.
So I think the way I would answer this question is I wish people would just ask, and these are some of the themes from what people have said, is how are we going to get this done? Like, we're at conferences and discussions and panels and working groups, and we're really talking about a pretty similar thing. Like, we want to, like, solve inequality in this country. Like, I mean, I know it's quite broad, but like there is a lot of alignment as to, we know what the issues are, we want to fix them, we want to get to work on them. And, you know, when you're talking about Native Leads program, like, here's the funding and now let's go work on it. I just wish so much of the conversation was like, how are we going to get this done and how are we going to figure it out? Because this is a non-negotiable, that we're going to work on this and we're going to do it. So I just want to say thanks so much for the panelists, and thanks to everyone for joining, and hope you got something out of it.